Man's Relationship with the Nature Kingdoms, Part 2. In this talk, we consider man's relationship with the fourth of the nature kingdoms with which he shares the earth. This one is intangible, non-material, and cannot be appreciated by the five physical senses unless they are in a condition of heightened awareness. Its existence cannot be proved to the satisfaction of the scientist, nor can the reactions of its inhabitants be demonstrated in the laboratory. Yet, to one with heightened awareness of the physical senses, or who is able to bring the higher senses into operation, it is as real as any of the more material kingdoms. The doubter who puts belief in this kingdom down to imagination or hallucination will never be convinced of its reality until his inner awareness is developed. It is a waste of time trying to get him to change his mind. One can only hope that someday this will happen to him, or that scientific research will find the right technique for demonstrating its existence. There has been a great expansion of interest in parapsychological research all over the world, and at any time a new and convincing breakthrough may take place. From my own experiences, I know that this kingdom exists, but other people's experiences do not necessarily convince those who have not had similar ones. Let us define what is meant by the elemental kingdom. The ancient and medieval philosophers believed that everything, all matter, was made up of different combinations of what they called the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. They also believed that these so-called elements were inhabited by beings or entities, which became known as elementals. We know this from the ancient myths and legends. Earth, air, fire, and water are not elements in the present-day meaning of the word, but they are useful and important concepts in esoteric and occult teachings, having a higher significance than the purely physical one. It is important to understand this interpretation of the word elemental as an inhabitant of the so-called elements, earth, air, fire, and water, as certain schools of thought use the word to mean negative or even evil entities from the lower astral plane, and therefore different from nature spirits, air spirits, and so on. Of course, there are such elemental entities in the lower astral plane, which are mischievous or evil, but I prefer to regard them as pseudo-elementals, since to me the real elementals are the spirits of earth, air, water, and fire, which do not belong to the astral plane at all, coming from a higher plane, being part of the angelic hierarchy. I do not ask you to accept this definition if your own is different, and if your own beliefs are otherwise, but put it forward as the result of the contacts I have made and the information I have been given. It is the basic belief from which this talk developed, and from my point of view fundamental to an understanding of the elemental kingdom. I do not mean to be either presumptuous or dogmatic, but so convincing have the various experiences and contacts been that I can hold no other view. How do I know the whole thing is not due to imagination? Because I do not have much imagination, and certainly not a fantastic one. I could not possibly have made up the extraordinary experiences I have been through. My imagination functions on a practical level, inventing gadgets and ways of getting round material difficulties. You have only my word for this, to accept or reject. Hallucination? It does not seem to be so to me, but you're entitled to that opinion. Only if my hallucinations in the Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh ultimately caused things to happen in a place like Findhorn Garden, does it matter? The things happen. It certainly all began in the Botanic Gardens in March 1966. Edinburgh is lucky in possessing fine botanic gardens of considerable extent and containing many varieties of every kind of tree, bush, shrub and flower that will grow there. It was a beautiful day in mid-March, and I went to the gardens in the afternoon. They are not far from where I live, and I visit them often. After wandering around for a while, I went along a path which skirts the north side of Inverleith House, which is now the Edinburgh Modern Art Gallery. Leaving the path, I crossed a considerable expanse of grass which is dotted with trees and bushes to a seat under a tall tree. The back of the seat was almost touching the trunk of the tree, so that when I sat down I could lean my shoulders and the back of my head against the tree. I have all my life had a great love for trees and a feeling of affinity with them, in spite of being mainly a town dweller. They are living things, and nothing delights me more than to wander through a forest or a wood, talking to the trees. Sitting there, I became, in some way, identified with the tree, becoming aware of the movement of the sap in the trunk, and of the infinitely slow growth of the roots. There was a heightening of awareness and a feeling of expectation. Something was going to happen. I felt wide awake and full of energy. There was a tension in the air, as if the air itself was beginning to shimmer. I sat in utter contentment, wondering what was going to happen. Suddenly I saw a figure dancing round a tree about 20 or 25 yards away from me, a beautiful little figure about 3 feet high. I saw with astonishment that it was a faun, F-A-U-N, the Greek mythological being, half human, half animal. He had shaggy legs ending in cloven hooves, pointed ears, and a chin, and 2 little horns on his forehead. His skin was light brown, a most beautiful being. I looked in amazement, and even did the obvious, pinched myself to see if I was awake. I wondered for a moment if it was a boy made up, but obviously it wasn't. The cloven hooves were too definite. This was some strange creature, the like of which I had never seen before. Hallucination? No, it was much too real. He was as distinct as any of the people in the garden. Was I going round the bend? I didn't think so. Suddenly, it all seemed natural. Why shouldn't I accept it? Here was something wonderful, something exciting. So I stopped trying to explain it away and watched the little being with delight. He danced across to another tree, went round it several times. Then, after going to a third tree and round it, he came towards me, stood looking at me for a moment, and then sat cross-legged in front of me. I looked at him. He was very real. No doubt I was not seeing him with my physical sight, though when I closed my eyes, he wasn't there. I leant forward and said, "Hello." He leapt to his feet, startled, and stared at me. "Can you see me?" "Yes." "I don't believe it. Humans can't see us." "Oh, yes, some of us can." "What am I like?" I described him. He still looked bewildered. He went on dancing about, pirouetting round. "What am I doing?" I told him. Still looking astonished, he said, "You must be seeing me." He then danced across to the seat beside me, sat down, turned towards me, and looking up at me said, Why are human beings so stupid? Now, I may, in some ways, be over-personalizing this being. The communication between us was taking place on a mental level by means of thought transference, probably in the form of images and symbols projected into my mind, which was automatically putting them into words. I was certainly speaking to him, though I cannot be certain whether mentally or aloud. I usually speak aloud to such beings when I meet them now. Of course, if I was seen and heard by anyone passing near enough, they would think, there's a daft old man speaking to himself. How silly. I have to put our exchange in the form of dialogue. That is what it seemed to me to be. There is always the possibility of coloration coming from my own mind, so I am on the lookout for that and try to guard against it. Trained as a scientist in objective observation and logical thinking, and having a reasonably good memory, when I write down an account of things that have happened, I do not tend to exaggerate them or write them up to make them more effective. To the best of my belief, what I am telling you now is exactly what happened. To get back to his question, why are human beings so stupid? In what way stupid? Oh, in many ways. What were the strange skins or coverings they had, some of which could come off? Why didn't they go about in the natural state like he did? I told him the skins were called clothes and that we wear them for protection, for warmth, and because it isn't considered right not to. This latter he could not understand, so I did not pursue the subject. We talked about houses and about motor cars, which he called boxes and wheels in which foolish human beings dashed about, sometimes bumping into each other. Was it a game? He told me he lived in the gardens, though this is only part of the truth, as he is an inhabitant of another plane as well. He functioned in the gardens, helping the growth of the trees. He also told me that many nature spirits have lost interest in the human race, since they have been made to feel that they are neither believed in nor wanted. If you humans think you can get along without us, just try. Some of them do believe in you and want your help. I do, for one. There was no desire to ask questions, as the wonderful thing to me was the sense of companionship. I felt such an amazing harmony with this little being sitting beside me. A communication that did not need to be put into words was taking place between us. We sat without speaking until I realized it was time for me to go home. I rose and said I must go. Call me when you return here and I'll come to you. He told me his name was Kurmos. I then asked him if he could visit me. Yes, if you invite me. I do. I shall be delighted if you will come and see me. You do believe in me? Yes, of course I do. And you like us? Yes. I have a great affection for the nature spirits, which was true, though he was the first one I had actually seen. Then I'll come now. We walked to the west gate of the gardens, out into Arboretum Road, and right through the streets of Edinburgh to my flat. I was amused at the thought of the sensation it might have caused had this strange and delightful little faun been as visible to the passers-by as he was to me. He came into the flat with me. I have a fairly large collection of books, and the front room is lined with bookshelves. What were they? Why so many? I explained to him that they contained ideas, speculations, facts, theories, accounts of past events, stories invented by the writers, and so on, all of which were put into print and made up into books which could be read by others. Why? You can get all the knowledge you want by just wanting it. I explained to him that human beings could not do that very wonderful thing, yet. They had to be content to get knowledge from other people or from books. Again, we spent some time just sitting in wonderful harmony. He got up. He would have to go back to the gardens. The door of the room was open, and he walked out into the hall. I followed him, and probably because he looked so solid and real, I opened the door of the flat. He went out onto the landing, and I watched him run lightly down the stairs. As he reached the bottom, he faded out. This was an astonishing experience to have had, which I could not have imagined. What puzzled me was, why a faun? I had not been reading any Greek mythology for some years. It has been suggested to me that as a pianist, my fondness for playing Debussy explains the faun. But it is the other way round. I only developed my present delight in Debussy after seeing the faun. Next time I went to the gardens, I called to him, and he was immediately by my side. We did not talk much. It was again awareness of a wonderful harmony and companionship. I knew that here was infinite, mature wisdom, yet, combined with the naivety of a child, I did not want to ask questions. What was right for me to know, I would be given in time. I did not realize that this was going to lead to something even more unusual, which took place over a month later, at the end of April. I had been to visit friends who lived on the south side of the town. It was after 11 o'clock at night, and I was walking home. Those of you who know Edinburgh will remember that Princes Street has buildings mainly on one side, the north side. Except for the North British Hotel at the east end, St. John's Church at the west end, the two Greek-like buildings halfway along the street, the Royal Scottish Academy, and immediately behind it the National Gallery, and the Scott Monument between the RSA and the hotel, there are no other buildings. Opposite Princes Street is the castle, perched high on its rock, with the long ridge leading down to Holyrood, carrying the High Street or Royal Mile, and many of the buildings and streets of the old town. A built-up mound carries a street called the Mound, which joins the High Street to the centre of Princes Street in a double curve. On one side is the castle, and far below it the railway and the West Gardens. On the other side, the RSA and the National Gallery, the East Gardens and Scott Monument. It was a beautiful evening. There were few people about as I walked down this street from which there is a wonderful view of Edinburgh. I was thinking how beautiful the city looked with its many lights, and how peaceful it was at the moment. I was feeling contented. I had been at an interesting evening, and I was thinking over some of the things we had talked about. As I turned the corner into the last part of the street which runs down the side of the National Gallery, I walked into an extraordinary atmosphere. I had never before encountered anything like it. It was as if I had no clothes on and was walking through a medium denser than air, but not so dense as water. I could feel it against my body. It produced a sensation of warmth and a tingling like pins and needles or an electric shock, like cobwebs brushing against my skin. It is difficult to describe. Again, there was a feeling of expectation, a heightening of awareness. As I approached the space between the two buildings, I was aware of a figure walking beside me. a figure that was slightly taller than I am. It was a faun, radiating a tremendous power. I glanced at him. Surely this was not my little faun suddenly grown up. We walked on. He turned and looked at me. "Well, aren't you afraid of me?" "No." "Why not?" "All human beings are afraid of me." "I feel no evil in your presence. I see no reason why you should want to harm me. I do not feel afraid." "Do you know who I am?" I did at that moment. "Yes. You are the great god Pan." "Then you ought to be afraid. Your word panic comes from the fear my presence causes." "Not always. I am not afraid." "Can you give me a reason?" "It may be my affinity with your subjects, the earth spirits and woodland creatures." "You believe in my subjects?" "Yes." "Do you love my subjects?" "Yes, I do." "In that case, do you love me?" "Why not?" "Do you love me?" "Yes." He looked at me oddly, with a strange smile and a glint in his eyes. He had deep, mysterious brown eyes. "You know, of course, that I am the devil. You've just said you love the devil." "No, you are not the devil. You are the god of the woodlands and all that dwell in them. I sense no evil in you. You are Pan. But you know that the Christian church took me as a model for the devil. Look at my cloven hooves, my shaggy legs, and the horns on my forehead. The church turned all pagan gods and spirits into devils, fiends, and imps. Was the church wrong then? The church did it with the best intentions from its own point of view. But it was wrong. The ancient gods are not necessarily devils. We crossed Princes Street, passed Jenner's shop, and turned into South St. David Street. "What do I smell like?" Since he joined me, I'd been aware of a wonderful scent of pine woods, of damp leaves, of newly turned earth, and of woodland flowers. I told him. "Don't I smell rank like a goat?" "No, you don't. There is a faint, musk-like animal smell, like the fur of a healthy cat. It's pleasant, almost like incense." "Are you still claiming to be the devil?" "I have to find out what you think. It's important." "Why?" "For a reason." "Won't you tell me what it is?" "Not now. It will become apparent in time." We walked on and crossed the end of George Street. Pan was walking very close to me. "You don't mind me walking beside you?" "Not in the least." He put his arm round my shoulder. I could feel the physical contact. Here was not only sight and sound, but touch as well. "You don't mind if I touch you?" "No." "You feel no repulsion, no fear?" "None." "Excellent." I could not think why this determined effort to get a sign of fear. I am not making any claims to being a brave man. There are many things that would scare me out of my life. But for some reason or other, this being did not inspire me with fear. I felt awe because of his power, but not fear, only love. I did not know then that for his purpose, Pan had to find someone who felt no fear of him. He is a great being, the god of all the elemental world. of the woodland creatures. People may feel uneasy in his presence because of the awe he inspires, but there should be no fear. All human beings are afraid of me. This was not threatening. It was said with sadness. The Christian Church took me as a model for the devil. This is why Pan is feared, because of the image projected onto him. Most human beings instinctively fear the devil, and that fear is transferred onto Pan because of the association. This image must be lifted off him, so that his true nature may be revealed. This was why he had to find someone who did not fear him. We turned into Queen Street. As we passed the post office, I asked Pan where his panpipes were. He smiled at the question. "I do have them, you know." There he was, holding them between his hands. He began to play a curious melody. I had heard it in woods before, and I have often heard it since. But it is so elusive, I can never remember it afterwards. When we reached the downstairs main door of the flat, he disappeared. But when I entered the house, I had a strong feeling that he was there, though I could not see him. This strange encounter made a very strong impression on me. I had no idea why it had happened, or why this being had chosen to show himself to me. It looked now as if the meeting with the little faun Kurmos in the Botanic Gardens had been a kind of preliminary encounter. I could not dismiss either as imagination. Both beings were much too solid and real. It left me wondering what was going to happen now. The next significant meeting was early in May on Iona in the Hermit Cell, which is a ring of stones, all that remains of the cell where St. Columba used to go in retreat. It is about halfway across the island, almost on a level with the abbey. I was there with two friends, one of whom was Peter Caddy. I was standing in the centre of the cell, facing in the direction of the abbey, which was hidden from sight by rising ground. In front of me was a gentle grassy slope. I became aware of a large figure lying in the ground, right in the ground. I could see him through the grass. It appeared to be a monk in a brown habit, with the hood pulled over the head, so that I could not make out the features. His feet were towards me. As I watched, he raised his hands and rolled back the hood. It was Pan. He rose up out of the ground and stood facing me, an immense figure at least 25 feet tall. As he did so, the habit fell away. He was smiling, and he said, "I am a servant of Almighty God, and I and my subjects are willing to aid mankind in spite of his treatment of us and his abuse of nature, if he affirms belief in us and asks for our help." I knew that in some way this was the beginning of a reconciliation between Pan and the nature spirits and man. The next encounter of importance was an amazing experience at Attingham Park, the Shrewsbury Adult Education College, after a course held in September 1966, the same year. It was on a Monday morning, just before leaving. I had an impulse to go to a place known as the Mile Walk before I left, and that I must go alone. I walked along by the river until I came to a huge cedar tree with a seat at a bend in the river. To the left was the beginning of the rhododendron walk. considered by some to be a place of great spiritual power. I sat on the seat for a while, enjoying the view up the river. Then I went into the walk. As I did so, I was aware of a tremendous build-up of power and an increase in awareness to a high degree. Everything was heightened and became more significant in colour. I was aware of every single leaf on the bushes, of every blade of grass on the path. I was aware of every leaf on the trees and of the markings on the bark, standing out with startling clarity. It was as if physical reality had become much more real than it normally is. The three-dimensional effect we are used to became much more so. It is an overwhelming experience when it happens and impossible to describe in words, something one must experience for oneself to understand fully. The clarity of vision becomes intense. There was an awareness of different levels, all existing at once, of the physical and the higher planes coming together in unity that made complete contact with the divine. Everything was one in the now. There was no time anymore. As I started to walk up the path, Pan was beside me. He suddenly stepped behind me and walked into me. It was not a form of possession, but of a complete identification. I saw things through his eyes, yet part of myself was standing aside, watching. This detached part of the consciousness, the observer, is very important in phenomenon of this sort. The moment he stepped into me, the place was alive with myriads of beings, nymphs, dryads, fauns, elves, gnomes, and fairies, far too numerous to define. They varied in size from tiny little beings, a fraction of an inch in height, like the ones I saw swarming about in a clump of little toadstools, to beautiful elven creatures, 3 or 4 feet tall. Some of them danced round me in a ring. All were welcoming and full of rejoicing. The nature spirits love and delight in the work they do, and have to express this in movement. I felt I was outside time and space. Everything seemed to be happening at once. There was intense exultation and a feeling of joy and delight, but underneath there was peace, contentment, and spiritual awareness. There was a sense of unity between man, the nature spirits, the fundamental cosmic energies, and the spiritual realms of light, all becoming one within the divine mind. I reached a clearing at the end of the walk where there is a great tree with a seat, though I had still no sense of time. This tree is one of the sentinels of this sacred place. I turned and began to walk back the way I had come. I had panpipes in my hands, and I was aware of shaggy legs and cloven hooves. I began to dance down the path, playing the pipes. The melody I had heard Pan play. The birds were singing, making a lovely counterpoint to the music of the pipes, and all the beings were dancing and rejoicing. When I had almost reached the beginning of the rhododendron walk from where I had started, the heightened awareness began to fade, and Pan withdrew. I was once more my ordinary self. The pipes had gone. The change from this extraordinary ecstatic experience to the normal reality of everyday life was not a disappointment, as what I had experienced was still there. Because of our dulled senses and our habit of going through life only half awake, and of wearing materialistic blinkers, we are blind to the fantastic beauty of the life around us. Yet it is there all the time, if only we knew and could sense it. Of course, if we could, it would be too overwhelming. We would be unable to perform our usual daily tasks. Approaching the end of the path, I began to walk sedately, which was just as well, as there was a boy sitting on the seat round the cedar by the river. It might have been disconcerting for at least one of us if I had come dancing out of the path, playing imaginary pipes at my age. After that, there were many other contacts with nature beings in different gardens and woods, and of further meetings with Pan, who sometimes again identified with me. Because I had responded to him with no fear, he could use me as a link. This does not make me important. I'm simply a channel he could use. But I feel greatly privileged in having been granted the ability to contact and communicate with these wonderful beings. One of the reasons for this contact, possibly the main one, was connected with what is happening in the garden of the Findhorn Foundation on the Moray Firth, which is an experiment in the cooperation between the devas, the nature spirits, and man. This has been described in a foundation publication, the Findhorn Garden. In this revised version of the reality of the elemental world talk, it is not necessary to go into details which are available there, but to deal with points raised in questions that have been asked and give some account of experiences with other elemental entities. A brief word about the devas. They are angelic beings. Deva is Sanskrit for angel. And as far as the vegetable kingdom is concerned, they apparently design the archetypal pattern for each species. They also channel down the required energies. At Findhorn, Davina is the authority on devas, as she can communicate with them. Much valuable and beautiful information and advice is given in house sections of the Findhorn Garden. The nature spirits may be regarded as the builders working to the archetypal designs, producing the etheric counterpart inside which the plant grows by channeling the necessary energies directed by the devas for this purpose. That such a thing as an etheric counterpart exists or is necessary will be questioned by many people, and at the moment it cannot be scientifically proved, though no doubt this will be possible in time. To the scientist, the whole plan of the tree is in the seed, contained in the genetic code in the DNA molecule. Plant the seed, and the tree will grow, needing no help from questionable entities such as nature spirits, whose existence outside the heated imagination of a few cranks is extremely doubtful. This is a legitimate point of view, and little can be done to change the opinion of those who hold it. In the earlier version of this talk, it was suggested that the DNA molecule itself may have an etheric counterpart. We ourselves are far more than our physical body. We have an etheric body and other higher bodies and our incarnate spirit. So do the plants have at least etheric counterparts, if not bodies. Why should the DNA molecule and all other molecules not have one as well? Can it really replicate itself without some form of etheric counterpart? Is it not possible that there might be elemental beings working with the counterpart? Would the tree grow without its etheric counterpart and the beings working with it? This, at the moment, is fantastic nonsense to the scientist. So one retired professor I met said he liked to think of the tiny fairy finger helping the butterfly's wings to unfold when it emerged from the chrysalis by smoothing the folds, and in the same way helping leaves and petals to unfold from the bud. Surely there is hope for the scientist yet. As the plant grows and develops within the etheric counterpart, built up by the nature spirits, man, by his intrusion into the environmental pattern, in trying to alter the form of the plant by artificial means, causes the plant to grow out of alignment with its counterpart, and so depart from the archetypal design. Apart from the fear and pain produced in the plant, this lack of alignment causes a considerable amount of discomfort and distress. Is man justified in departing from what is really God's plan? Why does man so often think he can do better than God? If he doesn't believe in the existence of God or of spiritual values, the question cannot be asked. No doubt man is justified in modifying nature's handiwork if the reason for doing so is sufficiently strong and reasonable. But it would be much better to do it by asking the nature spirits to bring it about by changing the etheric counterpart. As they have infinite power, they could and would do this if they were convinced that it was reasonable and a help to mankind, and not just for personal profit and expediency. Unfortunately, they are limited by the general climate of disbelief in their power and even in their existence. As the New Age develops, this disbelief will gradually be dispelled as more and more people begin to accept the idea of the existence of elemental beings who are prepared to help man, and so finally bring about true cooperation with this kingdom. An entirely new kind of horticulture and agriculture will develop out of this cooperation. Bad and harmful methods will be stopped. Many people find it impossible to accept the idea of elves, gnomes, and fairies working in the garden. A lot of fairy tale nonsense. Why do these entities appear in the forms they do? Their primary state is a higher one than the etheric, and is what may be termed a light body. This is not easy to describe. It is nebulous, like a fine mist, a whirl of energy in constant motion. It is coloured, either one colour only or a combination of colours, which do not blend, but remain distinct, like the colours in a rainbow. It frequently changes colour and is often covered with a multitude of fine, curved lines, themselves coloured, though usually golden, which seem to flow like liquid in a tube, forming continually changing patterns of incredible beauty. In this light body, the elementals are unable to work with the etheric body of the earth or with the etheric counterparts of the plants. They must take on an etheric body themselves in order to do so. Man is to a considerable extent responsible for the kind of etheric bodies these beings take on. In his myths, legends, and fairy tales, man has depicted a vast gallery of supernatural beings. I do not like the word supernatural, so let us use paraphysical instead. To what extent these were creations of man's own imagination processes and to what extent inspired, is open to question. But through the ages, these paraphysical beings have been thought about, talked about in oral tales, and written about, so that a vast number of what might be called thought forms have come into existence on an etheric level. It is these forms the elemental entities take over in order to carry out their work on earth, and possibly in the hope of being recognized for what they are, a hope seldom realized, for modern man, much less sensitive than he once was when contact was frequent and easy, has ceased to believe in the reality of these beings. No doubt he had to lose his sensitivity and awareness in order to develop his intellect. But the time has now come when this sensitivity is being gradually renewed, and a cooperation between man and these beings, in which man will have both his heightened awareness and his intellect, will come to pass. This is an exciting thought. It would seem that as well as the form, be it gnome, elf, or fairy, a personalized type of behavior is associated with the form and may be taken on by the entity, producing a strangely human kind of behavior. In many of the past legends and myths, man has made the paraphysical beings, gods, fauns, fairies, etc., behave in a human manner, showing human reactions and emotions, which can be taken on with the form, though it is not the true behavior of the entity itself, but belongs to the form. This can be illustrated by an amusing experience I had in the Botanic Gardens. I was sitting watching a group of little gnomes gambling round a tree, possibly having a break from their usual work. How like fat little children they looked, I thought. Immediately one of them turned round and looked at me. He came quickly over to where I was sitting, and putting his hands on his hips and looking very cross, he said, "I am not fat." Turning, he walked back towards the others with dignity. Human behavior? But of course he was right. According to his own kind, he was not fat. It is the nature of most gnomes to be tubby. This kind of behavior is different from the anthropomorphic projection of human emotions onto animals. Anyone attempting to write a true fairy tale today is faced with the difficult problem of balancing the human behavior taken on as part of the form with projected personal emotions and wishful thinking. Not an easy problem. Pan appears as the Greek myth depicts him, half human, half animal, and insists that he must be accepted in this form. It is right, as it symbolizes the union of intellect, represented by the human upper part, with a powerful, mysterious, deep, and intense nature energy, represented by the animal lower part, which is not present in man. Somebody once said to me how terrible it must be for such a great being to be imprisoned in such an ugly body. A very foolish remark. No one who has ever seen the real Pan could call him ugly. He is one of the most beautiful beings in his own right I have ever seen. Almost impossible to draw or paint. One day he appeared to me in my flat. I was sitting reading, and he was there in a chair opposite me. He stood up, and as he did so, changed into the conventional Greek god. "Which do you prefer?" he asked. "The one I know as Pan, the god of the elemental kingdom," I replied. He immediately changed back and smiled. To me, he was just as beautiful. Of course, he did not need to ask me any more than he did on previous occasions, as presumably he could read every thought in my mind. He was testing me, as he is constantly doing. The question of pollution is now in most people's thoughts. It is a serious and vital problem which must be dealt with. It is one of man's worst outrages against the earth and the nature kingdoms, and it could, if not dealt with, even lead to his self-destruction. It surely does not need to be stressed, just a reminder that the elemental beings can be of the greatest assistance to man in cleaning up the mess, if he will believe in them and ask for their help. The earth and water spirits could help to cleanse the earth and waters. The air spirits, our badly treated atmosphere, and the fire spirits, the etheric shell of the earth so badly polluted with negative thoughts and thought forms. But let us not end on a gloomy note. The problem is well known. As with the other kingdoms, man's relationship with the intangible, non-material one should also be one of love, understanding, consideration, and appreciation. The reward could be the richest of all. One thing must be stressed. It is very easy to believe that elementals have not much power when they are small. Tiny, wispy, fairy beings, such as live inside flowers, broom and gorse elves, which also can live in the flowers, and so on. There is a tendency to equate size with strength. In fact, these tiny beings have immense power, far, far greater than any human, because as true elementals who belong to the angelic hierarchy, they are cosmic entities, even the smallest of them. It is important to remember this fact. I have come across books that have treated the nature spirits as if they were moronic children in a patronizing manner which is most objectionable, and have met people who think of them as having very little real power. This makes them laugh, but it does not improve the relationship. The whole subject of the elemental world is vast and can only be touched on in a talk of this length. Many things, no doubt important, have had to be left out. But if some idea of the richness of experience to be gained from contact with this kingdom has been given, the talk will have achieved its purpose. Let me end with my delightful friends, the sand goblins. I call them goblins because in appearance they are more like goblins than any of the other elementals I have met. These ones work for the light. There is nothing dark or negative about them. There are, of course, negative and dark elemental beings from the astral plane, but I am not concerned with them in this talk. Their existence must be recognized, but need not be dwelt on. I first met the sand goblins in Findhorn Beach some time ago, when I was suddenly aware of a group of them gambolling about on the sand in front of me as I walked along the beach. They were a foot to 18 inches in height, had round bodies like a ball, round heads, very thin arms and legs, protruding eyes, and ears like rabbits on the top of their heads. I had an impression of peals of high-pitched, delighted laughter as they frisked about, turning somersaults and wrestling playfully with each other. There was a feeling of joy and delight. One of them climbed up me and sat on my left shoulder. He burst into peals of laughter and said I had such funny ears. Quite often after that, I would see them on the beach. Imagine my surprise when walking up Dublin Street from my flat in Edinburgh, I was suddenly aware of them gambolling up the hill in front of me with happy peals of laughter. Again, one climbed onto my shoulder. "What on earth are you doing here?" I asked. "Well, you see," he replied rather coyly, We all love you very much, and as you've not been to see us for quite a time, we thought we would come and see you. How delightful of you. But what about being in a city? The buildings, the pavements, the traffic, all the noise and people. We don't mind people. There are plenty on the beach. As for the rest, we just aren't aware. In any case, we've brought our own sand. On that happy note, I will end this talk.